The big guy, Jerry Weintraub, didn't want me for this. He wouldn't even consider me for a reading. Every time my name came up for in the casting submittal process, he was adamant. He says, I don't want a comedian. I don't want a comic actor for this role. This is a heavyweight part. I want an actor.
For millions of fans around the world, The Karate Kid wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural phenomenon. Released in 1984, it became a timeless story of resilience, mentorship, and triumph against the odds. At the heart of it all was the unforgettable bond between Daniel LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio, and Mr. Miyagi, the wise and soft-spoken karate master brought to life by Pat Morita. The character of Mr. Miyagi became more than just a teacher. He was a father figure, a symbol of patience, and a source of life lessons that continue to resonate with audiences decades later. But behind the iconic crane kicks and heartfelt training montages, the set of The Karate Kid held its own secrets, stories of tension, challenges, and hidden truths that were rarely spoken of at the time. Pat Morita, whose performance earned him an Academy Award nomination, carried many of those memories with him for years. Though beloved by fans, Marita faced struggles both on and off the set, from clashing expectations with producers to personal demons that haunted him throughout his life. In his final years, Morita began to open up about what really happened during the making of The Karate Kid. His reflections painted a picture that was both inspiring and heartbreaking, a story of dedication to his craft, the obstacles he faced, and the unforgettable experiences that shaped one of cinema's greatest underdog tales. Before his passing, Pat Morita finally confirmed the truths that fans had long speculated about, giving us a deeper look into what really happened on the set of The Karate Kid. When The Karate Kid began filming in 1983, few could have predicted that the project would become one of the most iconic films of the decade. The story of a bullied teenager finding strength and guidance through martial arts struck a chord with audiences. But the real magic came from the chemistry between Ralph Macchio's Daniel LaRusso and Pat Morita's Mr. Miyagi. Yet behind the scenes, the road to creating that dynamic was far from smooth. Pat Morita, despite his natural talent and comedic background, was not the studio's first choice for the role that would define his career. Producers and casting directors initially doubted Morita's ability to embody the wisdom and gravitas required of Mr. Miyagi, known largely for his comedic work on shows like Happy Days. Morita had built a reputation as a funny man, not a serious actor. Columbia Pictures executives feared that audiences wouldn't accept him in such a heartfelt and dramatic role. At one point, they actively resisted his casting, preferring a more authentic Japanese actor or someone with a background in martial arts. Marita, who was of Japanese-American heritage, faced an uphill battle not only against stereotypes, but also against Hollywood's narrow view of his abilities. Determined to prove himself, Morita underwent a series of intense auditions. He even grew facial hair to look older and more authoritative, and he adopted a slower, more deliberate style of speaking to bring depth to Miyagi's broken English. Behind closed doors, however, there was tension. Studio executives worried his accent sounded like a caricature, while others doubted whether he could convincingly portray a martial arts master. Morita himself admitted years later that the pressure weighed heavily on him. He wanted the role desperately, not just for the career opportunity, but for the chance to break through Hollywood's typecasting of Asian actors. Eventually, it was director John G. Avildsen, along with producer Jerry Weintraub, who championed Morita. They saw in him a unique ability to bring both humor and heart to the role. Avildsen argued that Miyagi wasn't meant to be a flawless warrior, but rather a deeply human character who carried his own pain and wisdom. When Morita performed Miyagi's now famous scene of drunken grief, mourning his lost wife and child, the doubts evaporated. Everyone on set recognized that Pat Morita wasn't just playing Mr. Miyagi, he was Mr. Miyagi. Still, even after landing the part, Morita faced challenges on set. Ralph Macchio recalled years later that while he immediately felt a connection with Morita, the actor was constantly under pressure to prove his worth to studio heads. There were whispers that producers were watching closely, ready to replace him if he didn't deliver. For Marita, who had struggled with personal demons including alcoholism and financial troubles, the weight of expectation was immense. What few knew at the time was how much Morita personally related to Miyagi's role as an outsider and mentor. Having grown up in an internment camp during World War II, Morita carried his own scars of prejudice and loss. Those experiences helped him pour authenticity into the character, making Miyagi more than a stereotype. He became a layered, empathetic figure. Marita once said in an interview, "I didn't just want to play a karate teacher. I wanted to play a man who understood pain, because I understood it too." The first days on set were filled with uncertainty, but as the cameras rolled, Morita's performance began to silence the skeptics. Ralph Macchio noticed how Morita would stay in character between takes, offering advice with the same quiet intensity that Miyagi gave Daniel. Crew members also warmed to him, seeing his dedication and vulnerability. Slowly but surely, Pat Morita transformed doubt into respect. In later years, Morita confirmed that the early skepticism and pressure nearly broke him, but it also fueled his determination. He knew that the role of Mr. Miyagi wasn't just about karate. It was about representation, resilience, and respect. His ability to push through those early doubts laid the foundation for one of cinema's most enduring characters. And while audiences saw only the wisdom and warmth of Mr. Miyagi on screen behind the scenes, Pat Morita was fighting his own battle to prove he truly belonged on the set of The Karate Kid. As The Karate Kid moved deeper into production, Pat Morita's presence on set began to feel indispensable. His performance was layered with humor, pain, and wisdom in equal measure. But while the cameras captured the charm and serenity of Mr. Miyagi, the reality behind the scenes was often much more complicated. For Morita, the set was not just a workplace. It became both a sanctuary and a battlefield where he wrestled with personal struggles, doubts from others, and the weight of living up to a role that was quickly becoming larger than life. One of the most striking challenges Morita faced was the ongoing skepticism from certain figures tied to the studio. Even though director John Avildsen and producer Jerry Weintraub believed in him, there were executives who continued to question his casting throughout filming. Some whispered that he was too comedic to handle Miyagi's more serious scenes, while others doubted his ability to pull off the physical aspects of karate. Morita admitted years later that he often felt the pressure of having to earn the role every single day, even after he had been officially cast. That constant scrutiny weighed on him heavily, creating an invisible tension that lingered on set. Then there were Morita's own insecurities. Though beloved by the cast, he battled with self-doubt. He had no martial arts background, which only made the pressure worse. To bridge this gap, fight choreographer Pat E. Johnson worked tirelessly with Morita, teaching him the basics and guiding him through the physical movements that would define Miyagi's mystique. Morita threw himself into the training, learning to move with precision, but often relied on stunt doubles for complex sequences. He later confessed that part of him felt like a fraud, even though audiences would never notice the difference. At the same time, Morita's personal life was a shadow that followed him into the production. He had long struggled with alcoholism, and although he managed to keep his issues largely hidden during filming, those close to him knew the burden he carried. Ralph Macchio would later recall moments when Morita seemed emotionally drained or distracted, a reminder that behind Mr. Miyagi's calm demeanor was a man still wrestling with demons. Morita himself admitted that the role was, in many ways, a reprieve. Playing Miyagi gave him focus and purpose, pulling him away from destructive habits, at least temporarily. Despite these struggles, the bond between Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio blossomed into something authentic and enduring. Their off-screen relationship mirrored the one audiences saw on screen. Macchio, who was just 22 at the time, looked up to Morita not only as a co-star but as a mentor. Morita, in turn, embraced that role, offering encouragement and wisdom with the same warmth that defined Miyagi. It wasn't forced, it was genuine. Their chemistry became the heart of the movie, and both men later admitted that the connection they built was one of the highlights of their careers. But the set wasn't without tension. According to those present, Morita sometimes clashed with producers over the way Miyagi was portrayed. He was deeply concerned that the character could be reduced to a stereotype if not handled with care. Morita fought for moments of depth, like the now famous scene where Miyagi, drunk and grieving, reveals his tragic past. The studio initially wanted to cut it, arguing it slowed the film's pace, but Morita and Avildsen insisted it remain. That scene not only stayed, it became one of the most memorable and poignant moments in the film, showcasing Morita's range and silencing many of the doubters. Still, the weight of the role took its toll. Morita later admitted that while filming some of Miyagi's most emotional scenes, he often drew from his own painful past, his childhood in a Japanese-American internment camp during World War II, the prejudice he faced in Hollywood, and his struggles with addiction. Those experiences gave his performance authenticity. Best, you didn't feel like you were acting with Pat. You felt like you were learning from Mr. Miyagi. Behind the scenes, though, the battle was ongoing. Pat Morita had won the part, but he was still fighting for respect, battling his own insecurities and carrying private pain that few around him fully understood. The public saw only the wise mentor, but the man behind the role was navigating one of the most challenging periods of his life. The contradictions between his on-screen calm and off-screen struggles made his performance even more extraordinary, and even more tragic when, years later, he finally opened up about what those days on set had truly been like. The release of The Karate Kid in 1984 was nothing short of a phenomenon, and for Pat Morita, it was both a dream realized and a storm unleashed. Almost overnight, he went from being a struggling actor typecast in small comedic roles to one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. The role of Mr. Miyagi earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, something no one, not even Marita himself, could have predicted. But while the world celebrated him as a cultural icon, behind the curtain, Marita was facing struggles that fame only seemed to magnify. One of the most troubling realities for Marita was that, despite his newfound fame, he still wasn't fully embraced by Hollywood. Many executives viewed his nomination as a fluke rather than a recognition of true talent. Offers for roles poured in, but most of them leaned on stereotypical depictions of Asian characters, caricatures that Morita despised. He often turned them down, fearing that accepting such roles would undo everything Miyagi had represented. But turning them down also meant work became inconsistent. Morita had climbed to the top with Miyagi, only to find the industry wasn't interested in giving him the chance to stay there. This rejection fed into Morita's growing sense of isolation. The more the public adored him as Miyagi, the more he felt trapped by the character. At conventions and interviews, fans treated him as if he was Mr. Miyagi, expecting wisdom and serenity at every turn. While he loved the admiration, he admitted that it was exhausting to live up to the image. Behind closed doors, he felt the weight of being unable to escape the shadow of his most famous role. It was a blessing and a curse, he once confessed. Meanwhile, Morita's personal demons began to creep back into his life. Alcohol had always been his private battle, and though he had controlled it during the filming of the first Karate Kid, the pressures of sudden fame and the disappointment of Hollywood's typecasting pushed him back toward old habits. Friends and co-stars later admitted they sometimes worried about him, noting moments when he seemed distant or consumed by inner turmoil. The industry had celebrated him, but it hadn't protected him, leaving him to navigate his struggles largely on his own. The sequels to The Karate Kid offered temporary relief. With The Karate Kid Part 2 in 1986 and Part 3 in 1989, Morita was able to revisit Miyagi and bask again in the character's wisdom and strength. These films not only re-established his relevance, but also deepened the audience's love for Miyagi. The sequel's exploration of Miyagi's past, particularly his lost love in Okinawa, gave Morita some of his richest material. Yet, even in these triumphs, Morita confessed to feeling conflicted. He adored Miyagi but feared being typecast forever. Behind the scenes, tensions sometimes resurfaced. Producers wanted to lean into the action elements of the sequels, while Morita pushed for more depth and heart. He worried Miyagi could easily slip into caricature if stripped of his humanity. Ralph Macchio later revealed that Morita fought hard for moments of emotional truth, sometimes clashing with the studio to ensure Miyagi remained more than just a martial arts mentor. It was this commitment that kept the character authentic, but it also highlighted Morita's growing frustration with Hollywood's limitations. The success of the Karate Kid franchise gave Morita a second chance at stardom, but it did not erase the reality of his struggles. As filming wrapped on each sequel, he returned to the same personal battles that had plagued him before. His marriages became strained, his drinking grew heavier, and his career options outside of Miyagi remained limited. Hollywood could not see beyond the role, and Morita admitted in later interviews that this rejection cut him deeply. He had given everything to Miyagi only to find himself trapped in the character's shadow. Adding to this burden was the loneliness of being a trailblazer. Few Asian American actors had achieved the level of recognition Morita did, but that success came without the support system others in Hollywood might have enjoyed. He often felt isolated in an industry that valued him only when he embodied the role that made money. The disconnect between the man and the myth widened with each passing year. Still, Morita never allowed his struggles to affect his relationship with fans. No matter how difficult things became, he continued to appear at events, always ready with a smile or a story. For many, he was Mr. Miyagi in real life, and Morita cherished the joy he brought to others. But the truth he rarely shared was that the love he gave his fans was often not the love he felt from Hollywood, or even from himself. By the late 1980s, Pat Morita had cemented his legacy as one of the most beloved figures in film history, but privately he remained conflicted. He had proven his critics wrong, delivered a performance for the ages, and touched millions of lives. Yet behind the fame and accolades, he was still searching for acceptance, not just from Hollywood, but from within. It was this contradiction, the gap between Miyagi's serenity and Morita's turmoil, that haunted him most. And it was a truth he would only fully confront years later, as he reflected on what really happened during those unforgettable days on the Karate Kid set. As the years went on and the dust of Hollywood fame settled, Pat Morita began to speak more openly about his time on the Karate Kid set and the years that followed. Age and experience had given him perspective, and he no longer felt the need to hide the painful truths behind the magic of the film. What he revealed was both moving and heartbreaking. A portrait of a man who gave the world an unforgettable character while quietly suffering in ways few ever realized. In his later interviews, Morita often acknowledged that Mr. Miyagi had been both his greatest gift and his heaviest burden. On the one hand, the role transformed his life, granting him respect he had never imagined possible and an eternal place in cinematic history. On the other, it locked him into a character he could never escape. "Everywhere I went, I was Miyagi," he said. People didn't want Pat Morita. They wanted the wise teacher. He admitted that it was hard not to feel invisible, as though his true self had been eclipsed by the role. Morita also shared how deeply personal the character had been for him. The pain Miyagi carried in the film, his loneliness, his quiet strength, his moments of sorrow, came from Morita's own life. He had endured childhood in a Japanese-American internment camp, fought through illness as a boy, and later faced decades of prejudice in Hollywood. All of that was poured into Miyagi. That famous drunk scene where Miyagi mourns the loss of his wife and child wasn't just acting. It was Morita channeling his own grief, loneliness, and regrets. "I wasn't pretending," he admitted. "I was remembering." But perhaps the most haunting detail Morita revealed was how disconnected his personal life was from the character's wisdom. While Miyagi taught Daniel discipline, patience, and balance, Morita himself struggled with all three. His battle with alcoholism grew worse in his later years, straining relationships and leaving him emotionally drained. He admitted that there were nights when he drank not to celebrate, but to forget. The rejection, the loneliness, the inability to live up to the serene figure fans adored. He once confessed, "I gave the world Miyagi, but I couldn't give myself the same peace." His relationship with Ralph Macchio remained one of the few bright spots. Decades after the original film, the two shared a bond built on respect and genuine affection. Makio described Morita as a second father figure, while Morita called Makio the son he never had. Even as his health declined, Morita took pride in the fact that their friendship had outlasted the Hollywood machine. It was proof, in a way, that something real had come from the make-believe world of the movies. Toward the end of his life, Morita grew more candid about the industry itself. He didn't shy away from saying that Hollywood had never truly accepted him, despite his achievements. "They gave me Miyagi," he said, "but they never gave me another chance." He spoke openly about the frustration of being remembered for only one role, no matter how iconic it was. For a man who had fought so hard to prove his worth, it was a bittersweet truth that lingered with him until the very end. Yet, for all his pain and regret, Morita also expressed gratitude. He knew that through Miyagi, he had touched millions of people across generations. Fans from all over the world wrote to him, thanking him for inspiring them, guiding them, and in some cases, saving them. Teachers used Miyagi's lessons in their classrooms, parents passed them on to their children, and young people found strength in his words. Morita admitted that this outpouring of love humbled him. "Maybe Miyagi gave me what I couldn't give myself," he said softly. "Maybe he gave me peace through other people's eyes." In the final years before his death in 2005, Pat Morita spoke less about the pain and more about the legacy. He understood that he had become immortal through Miyagi, and he accepted that reality with a kind of quiet dignity. He confessed that the set of The Karate Kid had been both the happiest and most difficult time of his career, a place where he had found purpose, but also confronted his greatest fears. Looking back, he said, "It was magic, but it was also hard, and maybe that's what made it real." What Morita finally confirmed about his time on the Karate Kid set was not just the story of an actor playing a role, but of a man pouring his soul into something greater than himself. He admitted to the struggles, the doubts, the loneliness, and the demons, but he also recognized the beauty of what was created in spite of it all. Pat Morita was far from perfect, but in his imperfection, he gave the world a character who represented wisdom, kindness, and strength. In the end, that was the truth he left behind. That behind Mr. Miyagi's calm smile was a man who hurt deeply, who fought hard, and who ultimately found redemption in the role that defined him. For fans, the revelation only deepened their love for him. For Morita, it was his final confession, a reminder that the line between actor and character, between performance and reality, was never as clear as it seemed.